Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, around 1,000 servers have been infected with a ransomware strain that exploits a PHP vulnerability. Also, Microsoft confirms Windows 10 and Windows 11 issues that have been around for a few months. And Apple strikes a deal with OpenAI to get GPT for free. For this and more, keep listening to this episode, which of course is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud or MDM to remove local admin rights, manage lockdown applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And of course, also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. A previously reported flaw identified as CVE-2024-4577, which arises from errors in Unicode to ASCII conversion in PHP and affects servers running PHP in CGI mode or with accessible PHP executables, is being actively exploited by a ransomware strain known as Tell You the Pass, with over 1,000 servers reportedly infected. Victims have all files encrypted with a .locked extension being displayed. An accompanying ransom note demands roughly $6,500 in exchange for a decryption key. Interestingly, the number of infections jumped significantly to a high of 1,800 servers infected, but the number has since dropped to 1,000 according to research firm Census. They believe while many of the compromised hosts appear to remain online, the port running the PHP to CGI or XAMPP service stops responding, hence the drop in the detected number of infections. People running PHP on any Windows system should install updates as soon as possible to protect themselves. And I'll share a link that's useful for information like IP addresses, file names, and file hashes that administrators can use to determine whether they have been targeted in attacks or not. And that link will be with episode 340, and you can find that at 5bytespodcast.com. Oddly, Microsoft recently added a new entry to the Windows Message Center about an issue that was first reported all the way back with the April KB 5036979 preview update. Users started to report that attempting to use a registered task with the Windows 10 app, so for example, right-clicking on an app and using one of its available options, would result in just getting an open with dialog box. For example, if you were to right-click on the icon for the new Outlook for Windows app, you'll be shown tasks labeled as new message, new event, and open calendar, events that you could, or actions you could take on that application. Well, you'd instead get an open with dialog box when you click on one of those options. It's as though there's no detected file type association for each of those actions. And this bug reportedly affects all Windows apps with a registered task, and that includes Calculator, Microsoft's new Outlook as I mentioned, Microsoft Teams, Snip and Sketch, and Sticky Notes. Microsoft separately added an entry for a Windows 11 issue that prevents the Microsoft Photos app from launching. BleepyComputer.com reported that if your device has updated the Microsoft Photos app from the Windows Store on or after June 4th of 2024, which would be version 2024-11050.29009.0 and above, you may face issues with starting the application. It may display a spinning circle, after which it may just disappear. And if you use Procmon installed on your device, the error might display as access denied or process exit. So for all those people out there who have used Procmon extensively in their careers, access denied would usually be the first thing that you'd look for, and this does display an access denied when the issue is being encountered. They say the issue is most likely to occur if you have enabled either the prevent non-admin users from installing packaged Windows apps policy or its configuration service provider equivalent policy, block non-admin user install. Microsoft says they are working on a fix and will provide it in a future update. So the access denied error is pretty interesting. It seems like it's trying to use permissions that it does not have, which is not a good thing at all, especially in 2024, and particularly when it's Microsoft who sets these types of standards. Proton, who makes some great products like Proton Mail, is becoming a non-profit foundation. Proton CEO Andy Yen wrote in a blog post, quote, "We believe that if we want to bring about large-scale change, Proton can't be billionaire subsidized like Signal, Google subsidized like Mozilla, government subsidized like Tor, donation subsidized like Wikipedia, or even speculation subsidized like the plethora of crypto foundations. Instead, Proton must have a profitable and healthy business at its core." End quote. ArsTechnica reports the for-profit entity Proton AG can still do things like offer stock options to recruits and even raise its own capital on private markets. The foundation serves as a backstop against moving too far from Proton's founding mission. So it seems like two separate entities, one that's able to meet the business ends and grow, and the other that's going to be the nonprofit to essentially drive towards their mission. I guess keeping it all as for-profit might mean that investors who get involved will expect the company to go in a certain direction with the only intent to drive profit. So keeping that part as nonprofit allows them to stay within what they want to do rather than what they think will generate the most profit. Several years ago, I reported on Microsoft testing an underwater data center off Orkney Island in Scotland. It was expected that running a DC underwater could be cost-effective and efficient by filling the data center full of nitrogen rather than oxygen. Well, the testing is now complete, and WindowsCentral.com reports Microsoft now has 0 underwater data centers left in operation for this year. Noel Walsh, who's the corporate vice president of Microsoft's cloud operations and innovation team, stated, quote, "My team worked on it, and it worked. We learned a lot about operations below sea level and vibration and impacts on the server. So we'll apply those learnings to other cases." End quote. So it seems non-committal on a path forward using underwater data centers, but it seems like the project was at least a success by getting some useful data that could help drive operations for data centers going forward. The Los Angeles Unified School District has confirmed a data breach involving stolen student and employee data from their Snowflake account. A threat actor, UNC 5537, exploited accounts without multi-factor authentication set, which affected around 165 organizations. I believe the last I reported was 163, and it seems like that number may have gone up to 165 even. After downloading data, the attackers tried to extort companies, including the Los Angeles Unified School District, threatening to sell or leak their information. Different hackers, including SP1D3R and Satanic, have been selling or leaking the Los Angeles Unified School District's data with prices ranging from $1,000 all the way to $150,000. So the fact that so many Snowflake customers have been breached, I feel like this is a story that's going to keep growing in the coming weeks. So expect me to cover further stories of some of these customers having their data leaked. As previously reported on this podcast, the European Commission has accused Apple of breaching the Digital Markets Act, claiming the Apple App Store limits competition. They've now gone further in stating that they have reason to believe that the App Store rules not allowing app developers to communicate freely with their own users is in breach of the Digital Markets Act. Apple asserts that it complies with the law and has made changes to meet DMA requirements, including allowing developers to direct users to other purchasing options. So I believe that is something that came out with disputes they had with Epic and also I believe Spotify even too. Apple said it is confident that their current plan complies with the law. Another of Apple's main arguments is that users benefit from strong security measures by sticking to the official App Store. In response, the Commission says it will happily discuss security issues. Apple could face a fine of up to 10% of its global revenue if it does not comply with the Digital Markets Act. So in this instance, it seems like it may be a little bit of saber rattling on the part of the European Commission, because while they're stating this, they're also saying they're willing to talk to Apple, which, to be fair, I mean, they usually do that anyways. But methinks the fact that they're even making a statement about it means perhaps they're not seeing the progress with Apple that they were expecting. So another story that's probably going to develop in the coming months. ArsTechnica has reported that AI company Anthropic has launched a new version of its Gen AI product, Cloud 3.5 Sonnet. It features text composition, data analysis, and code writing, and boasts a 200,000 token context window, and reportedly surpassed ChatGPT's 4.0 or Omni release on some performance metrics. But it also reads like not on every metric. So it's fair to say that performance is maybe comparable to GPT 4.0 rather than better. And just a reminder, I did a session on AI, my first ever session on artificial intelligence, last week at the Cloud Paging user group, and the recording is now available to watch back if you would like to, and that can be found at cloudpagingug.org. If you just join the group, you'll be invited to the Slack workspace, and there's a meeting-recordings channel within the Slack workspace that links to all previous meeting recordings. There was an interesting opinion piece on ArsTechnica recently where they talked about AI power consumption, stating that power consumption from AI is projected to rise to 20 to 25% of all power consumption in the US. And while that is expected to increase to that level, AI is indeed already estimated to use a significant amount of energy currently. It's still just a small fraction of the total data center power consumption so far. The article goes on to the question of power consumption and resource demand versus quality of what is returned, and basically that kind of risk-reward. The article went through multiple examples, one of which was the AI image generation capabilities, where one estimate suggests creating 1,000 generative AI images takes as much energy as driving a car about 4 miles. If those images are as good or better than the ones you'd get more slowly from a human artist, the economic case for that energy usage is obvious, according to this article. But if the results have like too many fingers, which was common particularly in previous models, or the image is just completely unusable, perhaps puts incorrect text in the caption, then the energy is just wasted. It's an interesting conundrum. We are reaching a technological advancement that could be transformative, but it requires copious amounts of energy, and we're at a time in the world where we're facing into a climate crisis. I wish I had something clever to add to that, but I don't, because it just seems like we're going headlong into this no matter what, and the planet be damned. Now, the article does make some points about some improvements that are going to be made in terms of data center efficiency that could perhaps offset some of the power consumption required for AI, but at the end of the day, for-profit businesses are going to put their profits before anything else, in my opinion. So this is all unfortunately worrying. Thanks to Susan Bradley for this next one, who pointed out that in Microsoft's recent Windows 11 KP 5039302 preview release notes, it states that the Show Desktop button is on the taskbar again by default. You'll also now be able to create 7-zip and tar files using the context menu in File Explorer, amongst a few improvements and enhancements to the OS. In 2021 and 2022, Google introduced Google search results that are endless, essentially mirroring what you may experience on social media feeds like Twitter, where you can just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. Well, according to The Verge, the continuous scroll feature is being removed this week from desktop search results, while the feature will be removed from mobile results in the coming months. A Google spokesperson stated the change is to allow the search company to serve their search results faster on more searches, instead of automatically loading results that users haven't explicitly requested. So this is going to be a performance improvement, but it's also just another case of Google rolling out a feature and then relatively quickly putting it to bed again. It has been reported that Apple's recent announcement of leveraging GPT for its Apple Intelligence features may have somewhat of a surprise twist. ArsTechnica reports Apple is not paying OpenAI. Instead, it values the exposure of OpenAI's brand on its devices as sufficient compensation. This is interesting because Apple made it clear they intend to work with other Gen AI services in future too, but OpenAI is obviously the first. The likes of Mistral and Anthropic may be knocking at the door, so perhaps it's advantageous for OpenAI to get a presence before they have a chance, and offering their services for free on Apple's operating systems is a way to get an early foothold. Bloomberg has reported that neither company expects the agreement to generate meaningful revenue in the short term, and in fact, the partnership could burn extra money for OpenAI because it pays Microsoft to host ChatGPT's capabilities in the Azure cloud. However, OpenAI could benefit by converting free users to paid subscriptions, and Apple potentially benefits by providing easy built-in access to ChatGPT during a time when its own in-house large language models are still catching up. And there's another angle at play. Currently, OpenAI offers subscriptions that unlock additional features. If users subscribe to OpenAI through the ChatGPT app on an Apple device, the process will reportedly use Apple's payment platform, which may give Apple a significant cut of the revenue. According to the report, Apple hopes to negotiate additional revenue sharing deals with AI vendors in the future. A report from PwC reported recently that fewer than half of senior Irish executives believe AI can replace their staff. This figure is reportedly down from 70% from the same survey last year. According to the research, 83% of the executives think AI will have a positive or transformative impact on their businesses in the next 5 years, but only 26% can actually name any benefit or operational efficiency coming from the technology. And just 7% have implemented AI in their ordinary business operations. And interestingly, according to the Irish Independent, that 7% is the same number as this time last year. According to the survey, the main Irish company uses for generative AI so far, such as ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, or Google Gemini, are cyber defense, IT development, improving collaboration, sales and marketing, and enhancing supply chain. With cyber defense, interestingly, having the higher percentage and IT development second with 22%, the highest being 34% respectively. The survey of senior Irish executives also shows that 9 out of 10 executives believe AI will increase their cybersecurity risks, and 4 out of 5 think it will heighten other risks such as legal liabilities and reputational risks, and the spread of misinformation and bias towards specific groups of customers or employees, all of which I would certainly agree with. Despite 3/4 of respondents saying they intend to put in place AI or generative AI governance structures, only 7% have done so. Yeah, I bet you it's the 7% that are actually using it. Most companies have reportedly welcomed the EU's AI Act. So it's interesting, in Ireland at least, a bit of a slow burn because there hasn't been too much mobility towards AI in the last year. But if you listen to last week's episode of the podcast, that may not come as a surprise, because there's also been other reports that suggest Ireland is a bit slow to embrace technological changes and committing to work from home. Finally, in the news for this week, Wells Fargo has terminated several employees for simulating keyboard activity to appear actively working. The bank, along with other companies, has been using sophisticated monitoring tools since remote work has become widespread. While it is not definitive on whether or not those found to be using a mouse jiggler were only those who were working remotely, Wells Fargo said staff had been fired or resigned after review of allegations involving simulation of keyboard activity, creating the impression of active work. The BBC reports new rules recently came into effect in the US, which means that their brokers working from home must be inspected every 3 years. A spokeswoman for the firm said Wells Fargo holds employees to the highest standards and does not tolerate unethical behavior. So in previous episodes of the podcast, I've reported on remote workers who are moonlighting and working 2 or 3 jobs. There's been people that have been outsourcing their jobs because they were not being physically seen in the office, so they could just have someone else do their work for them. So certainly these types of people or just coasting by are a threat to anyone who actually enjoys remote working, because the bad few could spoil it for the rest. Now, I will say that I spend most of my career working in an office, and there are plenty of people that I worked with who were just hiding in plain sight. They were taking extra long lunches, coming in late, leaving early, doing damn all while at work. So it's not necessarily a work from home problem as much as a individual personnel problem, in my opinion. Thanks to Jeremy for sharing that story. And now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up this week, I saw an interesting tool called NewFileTime, which they've just released version 7.23 of. This is a small, portable, but effective tool that provides you easy access to correct or manipulate any of the timestamps for any file or folder on your Windows system, which seems like it could be used for malicious purposes, but interesting nonetheless. I saw a tip from Mikael Nystrom this week that said after a cyber attack, LAPS, LAPS, is mandatory in the recovery process. If LAPS was in place before an attack, it may have been prevented. So listen to him and get LAPS going in your environment if you haven't already. Finally, the Awesome Morris Daily published a blog post that's pretty extensive on Microsoft Delivery Optimization, Troubleshooting, and Reporting. So if you're not using that feature yet, or even if you are, this may be a blog post worth checking out. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening.